The United Nations top job is open, and for the first time, the job interview is public.
Sort of. I'm Ahmed Shabuddin.
I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in the stream. History in the making at the United Nations last night. Candidates vying to be the next UN Secretary General starred in the first ever live televised debate.
And even though the debate was serious, some of the candidates had fun on social media beforehand. Check out former New Zealand Prime Minister Helen Clark's Snap game. She tweeted it. Here she is talking with Kyodo, Japanese radio network. There she's looking at the UNDP. She's doing German public radio.
She has a good Snap game.
Better than mine, and she seemed quite busy.
Better than mine.
Beautiful panoramic of the East River view. Well, we also have a Snap game here, as well as many presence on social media. So remember, you can follow us on Twitter with #AJStream.
I'm Peter Pitts. I'm president of the Center for Medicine and the Public Interest, and I'm in the stream.
The UN Secretary General. It's been called the most impossible job in the world.
Overseeing a workforce of 44,000 people in 193 member states, the UN chief is the face of an agency designed to resolve conflicts, keep the peace, and improve lives.
But sex abuse scandals and allegations of mismanagement and corruption have stained the UN's name, and calls for reform are loud.
So for the first time in history, the UN has opened its secretive selection process to the world. 12 candidates vying for the top post are taking questions from member states, and on Tuesday, 10 of them stood in a live televised debate, even answering questions posed via social media.
But will a television show turn into real transparency and accountability? Well, with us to discuss, in New York, Natalie Samarasinghe is the executive director of the United Nations Association and co-founder of OneFor7Billion.org. Susan Elsner is head of the UN Non-Governmental Liaison Service in New York. Claudia Rosette is a foreign policy fellow at the Independent Women's Forum and a columnist for Forbes.com. And Dan Thomas is the communications director and spokesman for the Office of the President of the General Assembly. Welcome to the stream, everyone. Excited for this conversation. Now, Natalie, in 2013, you started campaigning for an open, transparent process to pick the next UN Secretary General. Take a look at my laptop. For everyone else, of course, you know this, Natalie, but here's what that campaign looked like. 750 organizations, 170 million people. So then what did it mean to you to see that process unfold this week?
It's really been so exciting. So I was sitting there yesterday watching the town hall thinking, I can't quite believe we've made it. When we started campaigning a couple of years ago, I don't think anyone thought we would manage to change a process that's taken place behind closed doors for 70 years. But that was basically our starting point. This is a really important job. It's a job that could affect the lives of the world's 7 billion people. And we just thought it was wrong for it to take place behind closed doors, subject to all sorts of secret deals and the whims of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council who, let's face it, don't exactly always have the best interests of the UN at heart. So it's great that we know for the first time who's actually running. It's amazing that last time, even some states in the UN had no idea who was actually, standing for the job. We know a little bit about them, their vision, their approach, and we have a chance to engage with them. But I think, as your colleague said in the opening, only time will tell whether transparency will actually lead to a better outcome and the best possible person getting the job.
And you say time will tell. It's also what transparency actually means that a lot of people are asking. We have Kimmy on Twitter saying, if picking the new UN Secretary General is done in back rooms, is it necessary to have this debate? It's pretty good, though. Whether it's good or not, I'm curious, maybe Claudia, you could take this. I mean, obviously 193 generals, assembly members can nominate candidates, but ultimately it's the 5 Security Council members that are going to choose this. What do you make of this? Is this really a meaningful step for transparency?
It is a meaningful step, but it's step one on a road of many miles. There's so far to go. I've been watching this process, and it's a little like watching the Miss Universe pageant. They're all for world peace, and I agree. I think that's a good thing too. But one of the questions is, what exactly is the UN really trying to do, trying to maximize? And part of nothing about the debate we've just seen, as far as it was a debate at all, and it was really sort of promotional speeches full of buzzwords. You know, they all want sustainable peace. Me too. But probably not quite the same approach that many of them want. Is that the backroom deals are still going to be cut. What we need to know about the candidates is much more about their actual backgrounds. In other words, not just the statements that they make. Politicians always make statements, right? Do you believe them? We need to know things like, how did Miss Irina Bokova, the head of UNESCO, end up with such an amount of valuable real estate in New York City? We need to know things like, what was the real record of Guterres? We need to know, yeah.
I was just going to say, if I could jump in there, I do think one thing that this process has been able to do is it's allowed all of us to actually focus on issues, such as the one you just mentioned, and track some of these backroom deals. We know who they are. Journalists will be following this much more closely. And I think you're right on the one hand. We've heard a lot of speeches about candidates who are going to be all things to everyone. I don't really think it's feasible for a candidate to be, the crusading moral voice of the world, but also the sophisticated negotiator and the management expert all at the same time. And we've heard all of the things that the UN should be doing, and no one's really asking and looking at, well, is it actually the right organization to be doing all of these things?
So I hear the two of you there, and meanwhile, someone who was at the UN, Dan, I'm wondering then what you think of this conversation that Claudia and Natalie are having there, especially what Claudia said about Miss Universe. It's really just a Miss Universe pageant. What do you make of that, Dan?
Well, not really. I mean, it's been a great thing. It's never happened before, as both of them said. That we know the names of the people who have been nominated for the top job. There are 12 candidates so far. We've on our website, we've published their vision statements. We've published their CVs. We've had them into the United Nations to get a grilling from member states for 2 hours, and then taken them out to get another grilling from the media at a stakeout. That's all been webcast. We've really put them through their paces. And then last night we had this extraordinary debate in the General Assembly Hall, which was packed to the rafters with staff, with diplomats, with civil society and business leaders that were also invited. The media as well were there filming and enjoying the spectacle. But it really has sort of opened this up in a way that's never been seen before. And as Natalie said, I mean, this is extraordinary because it's really the President of the General Assembly, for whom I work. I mean, he thoroughly agreed that there should be a transparent process, and he's taken his mandate to the maximum level to make it as transparent as it has been so far.
You know, it's interesting, Dan, you were talking about the Secretary General and you're replacing him, and this is what the transparent process is about, at least the beginning of it. And yet a lot of the criticisms that are happening online that, journalists keep asking about the UN is beyond kind of the Security Council, beyond the Secretary General. How much power does he actually have to bring about change? It feels as though the UN, for quite some time now, often talks about things that are wrong, both in terms of, about the organization and about the world and member states. For example, I'm sure you're familiar, if you look at the screen, this is an image that was circulating just a few months ago when Ban Ki-moon removed the Saudi-led coalition fighting in Yemen from an annual UN register of children's rights violators. He did it because Saudi essentially threatened to cut off crucial funding to the UN. And, there was a lot of fanfare around this. The reason I bring it up is many people have been, kind of giving that same criticism about the US and how the US has done that. So he called it unacceptable. That's what Ban Ki-moon said. He said the pressure that Saudi put on them is unacceptable, and yet he couldn't really do anything about it. So I just wonder, Vivian, what do you make of that? I mean, is the role really as powerful as we think it is? Susan, sorry, forgive me.
I might have a slightly different view than most people on this. I show up to work every day believing that I have a responsibility to deliver on UN values, and our office and other offices, whether it's Secretary General's office or UN agencies or what have you, have as much responsibility to deliver on the principles that this UN institution was founded on. So Whereas you may wish to focus on the power of the Secretary General and others might, I'm more focused on the bottom up power of people and influence here inside the system through actions like the 1 for 7 billion campaign and working together in partnership with the President of the General Assembly's office, our office, UN Non-Governmental Liaison Service, many UN agencies, together with member states. To me, there's a huge amount of power in that. And what we'd like to see is people showing up and engaging with the UN and participating with the agencies, with these high offices, because the door is open. And this is something that we want to spread the word about, and we've been really making great efforts to do so. And in terms of that, you saw the openness of the invitation for people to send in questions to the Secretary General candidates, which has been going on for 4 months now. And whereas some people would say, oh, it's a simple thing to send a question, we really feel that you have to get the questions right in order to hear the answers that we need. So we wanted to start from there. And I think they have made a difference. Civil societies bringing different kinds of questions than member states do. It has illuminated the character of the candidates. And furthermore, after the debates are done, the dialogues are done, what we can do is turn around and say back to the world, what are your answers to these questions as an instruction manual to the next Secretary General?
Right. So I hear you there. You mentioned delivering on principles from the ground up. So I'm wondering then how far these principles, this transparency that we're talking about, how far it then extends and if it goes down to the ground. I'm speaking in particular of a presser from earlier this year, from January, featuring the now former Assistant Secretary General. He began choking up, and I'm sure some of you have seen this, some of you online have also seen this, choking up at this news briefing when he was addressing allegations of sexual misconduct. And have a look at this and let me know what you think.
It's hard to imagine the outrage that people working for the United Nations and for the causes of peace and security feel when these kinds of allegations come to light. Particularly involving minors, which are so hard to understand. The United Nations is doing everything we possibly can to assist the victims, to bring accountability and justice for them, and hopefully to prevent these cases from, or any such cases from recurring.
Now, Claudia, I could see you reacting. It's hard to watch when we're seeing Anthony Banbury there emotional, and then even harder than think of the actual allegations and the children's lives that were affected allegedly here. What are you thinking?
If I may, I'm unimpressed because I think that the UN could do a great deal more, and it could start with a great deal more transparency. We've had so many cases of whistleblowers who have tried to call attention to horrible abuses, both financial corruption, rape of minors, lots, you name it. And what the UN typically does is it throws them out of their jobs and tries to shut them up. It hides documentation. Could I pull back for a minute on this whole picture? And let's just talk for a minute about what is the United Nations, because it looks like a big democratic institution. It isn't, actually. It's a collective. What we're talking about is something more like George Orwell's Animal Farm, which the animals, remember, set up meaning to make a wonderful egalitarian organization. They were all going to live very well. And then it all went terribly wrong for systemic reasons. You have a majority of countries at the UN that are not actually free nations. So the governments that have their seats don't really represent those people. You have a club of governments that represents the interests of governments. Very often that's not the interests of the little guy. And what the UN has become is an ever bigger, more sprawling, crossing jurisdictions. You know, it's very hard to get them to come to account on anything. Immense, a sort of neo-colonial empire. And I don't question that.
I'd like to just jump in on one thing here.
Go ahead, Susan.
Sorry. One thing I'm really sensitive about in terms of, you know, showing up to work every day here is the notion of the UN. And just as you were framing that it's this kind of amalgam, really. it isn't one thing and it doesn't have one character. And so I would like to just say that there are, I guess I would say, opportunities here to make the most of what the UN could be and can be and is on many days by finding the partners in the system who are allies to the causes that we all share, I believe. And I can tell you there are many, and many of them are actually in the highest offices. And Dan Thomas, who's on the call with us, is one, and there are many, many others. And when we kind of all partner together, whether it's civil society together with NGLS with the PGA's office, all of us combined forces, I think that's what directs us into an outcome like last night's debate where we all work together. And you know what? That event was pulled off in 2 weeks.
No, I think
well
said, and I think it's very easy to be cynical about the United Nations.
Well,
for good reason.
But
real reasons.
But just to be, can I just intervene? You say, you know, that's true of any organization. You know, that you have an issue with the aspect of it because it's, you know, made up of individual parts. I mean, I don't know that necessarily should excuse serious criticisms and allegations of, you know, people. Corruption, all these allegations of peacekeeping missions, the rape allegations, and there's been no real investigations to my knowledge. And I think those are all fair criticisms, no?
No, I didn't mean to be excusing any of it, but I do want to say that I think change has to happen through positive action and at least try to work with the allies that are inside the system who can realize a better dynamic. I am not in any way excusing what is absolutely egregious wrongdoing that I see in this system every day. I will not apologize for that. I will recognize it and acknowledge it. But what I decided to do, I've been here 6 years, and 2 years ago I reached a crisis point in my own consciousness and conscience about how much I could be associated with in terms of problems I saw with the way people behave, often in their jobs, which have high responsibilities. And I decided I can be just as much the UN as anyone else, and I can show up to work every day and live the values that we want to see and try to find other people that do. Set an example, demand something better, and at least if we approach it, criticize it, but then also fix it.
Right.
We have
and Claudia, I hear you there. I then want to then juxtapose to the point that the clip that I played of Banbury, he then resigned shortly after that. So not everyone is feeling that they can make that change. You were talking, and then I heard Dan and Natalie both want to jump in.
Yes.
Dan, why don't you go first?
Yeah, no, I think, in fact, just on that clip, I mean, I think it's extraordinary to see a UN official, you know, breaking down in tears like that during a press conference, a very human emotion. And I think in many ways reflects the emotions, the feelings of so many staff who put their lives on the line, who live in very difficult conditions, who spend their whole careers trying to protect the kinds of people that had been abused in that case. So in some ways it's a very revealing clip in the sense that it shows not a sort of stony-faced bureaucrat trying to justify some clear sort of mistakes that have happened in the system, but actually, you know, reacting emotionally to it. But let's look at some of the good things that the United Nations stands for. Yes, it is a collective, 193 member states, and working on some of the big sort of issues of the world. And let's not forget that just as early as last December, they got together to agree on a global climate change agreement to reach agreement on how the world can fix this huge problem which all countries have a role to play in. I mean that was a huge success. Christiana Figueres, one of the candidates in the debate last night, was instrumental in bringing those nations together to sign an agreement. And then in September an agreement on a new agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals. Agenda 2030, an agenda for all people to bring all nations universally out of poverty and continue to develop the world. I mean, these are huge global problems, and here we see two examples of member states working together to try and make the world better for people and the planet.
Dan, I know that Claudia wants to speak, and Natalie was trying to speak earlier. Yes, Claudia, we'll come right back to you, but I just want to point out, you know, as we're having this conversation, reacting to that video, Abdurrahman Jamo is saying to us, a zero-tolerance policy on rape by predatory peacekeepers. Why don't you form an independent body to judge the 100+ cases over the last 2 years? You know, many people have been talking about there is this zero tolerance policy and little has been done. Just want to quickly read this out to you. It was something that Anthony Banbury actually wrote in March in the New York Times, and then Natalie, we'll get your reaction. He actually said, I love the UN, but it's failing. If you locked a team of evil geniuses in a laboratory, they could not design a bureaucracy so maddeningly complex, requiring so much effort, but in the end incapable of delivering the intended result. The system is a black hole into which disappear countless tax dollars and human aspirations, never to be seen again. Now, Natalie, maybe that's extreme, but what's your reaction? I mean, he's onto something there, no?
I mean, I think one of the issues, just following on from the tweet you just read out, is that it is time to tackle sexual abuse and corruption, and I don't think the UN does a good enough job at doing that and tackling it head on. It's not just about sort of doing an investigation or saying something. It's about being very upfront about this. But I think we also, especially in the case of sexual abuse by peacekeepers, need to remember who is actually in power here and who is able to actually prosecute, the individuals who are perpetrating these crimes. As so often,
but what's
the UN
answer?
Actually has very limited options. Well, I think the answer is to set up a tribunal, a sort of international mechanism that can do that.
But isn't it an international organization that is now has all these allegations coming in? So the solution is to create another independent international organization. It just seems a lot of the criticisms.
Well, what are we going to do? I mean, I think this issue, and it's the point that I think Claudia was making. It was set up to save the world, and I think the reason people get so frustrated is actually because it's about expectations and this organization not delivering. That is not my reading of how the UN was formed. It was a very pragmatic response to horrible war, where countries got together and said, you know what, let's try and solve problems by talking. Let's try and work together because it's better than the worst. It's in the words of one of the UN's, I think, most effective Secretaries General, Dag Hammarskjöld, it wasn't created to create this sort of perfect universe and environment, but to save us from the very worst that's happening. And I think, it's easy to point the finger at the UN. Susan's point about having many UNs is right. It is member states. It is they who have the job, and they're not going to give, have the political will to give the UN the support, the resources, anything, anytime soon. That's why this whole process is important, because good leadership.
So I hear you there, Natalie. And then my question then is, which of these leaders? So we saw yesterday 12. There were 10 there. A couple were missing from the debate on Tuesday. But then which of these candidates could be the person out in charge of that? I want to show you a little clip. I want to take us back to the debate. Show you a little clip of our correspondent, Al Jazeera correspondent James Bays, questioning some of the candidates on a story that we all know well and we've covered here on Al Jazeera, the cholera outbreak in Haiti. Take a look at what happened.
Maybe we can have a show of hands. As Secretary General, would any of you admit responsibility and apologise to the people of Haiti? Who would do that?
So you saw there Costa Rica's Cristina Figueres, and earlier I heard you, Dan, mention her as someone who was out in front of the climate change issue there. Claudia, I want your thoughts on that, and then what you think going forward when you see issues like that. And she went on to say that the UN was, of course, unintended, but she took responsibility. What do you make of that?
Well, that is a good response. And the problem the problem we have here is the UN people have been proposing reforms for the UN for decades. I can show you shelves and shelves. Part of that stuff behind me is endless proposals. And they all really don't get anywhere. We end up with more corruption, the Oil for Food program, bribery of the procurement department, peacekeeper rape, problems with the auditors themselves. We just had another report come out from one of the Joint Inspection Unit saying they're no good at actually monitoring themselves. What we need from a Secretary General who doesn't have great power to do things, but has to sort of force things to happen, but has a tremendous platform. He or she has a world stage and has great power that way and cannot be removed, by the way. There's no procedure to impeach a Secretary General. So somebody with a real backbone and real principle, and I don't really think we've seen that in a long time.
And Claudia, obviously the debate is not going to end today. I hate to cut you off, but we're out of time. This conversation, like many conversations about the UN and otherwise, will continue with our online community. with the hashtag AJStream. Thank you to all our guests for being with us. Conversation does not stop here. Take care.